2 months after finding Tommy, Jake's life had settled into a rhythm he never could have imagined. The baby was thriving, gaining weight steadily and hitting all his developmental milestones. Jake had become confident in his caregiving abilities, and the ranch felt like a real home again. On a crisp October morning, Jake was feeding Tommy his breakfast when he heard the sound of a car coming up the long driveway. Through the kitchen window, he could see an unfamiliar blue sedan making its way toward the house. Jake's first thought was that it might be Mrs. Chin coming for her weekly visit, but she always drove a white county vehicle. Jake put Tommy in his high chair with some soft finger foods and went to the front door. A woman in her 30s was walking up the porch steps, and Jake could see that she was nervous. She had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she kept glancing around the ranch as if she was looking for something specific. "Mr. Morrison," she asked when Jake opened the door. "My name is Lisa Garcia. I think you might have my baby." Jake's world stopped. He had always known this moment might come, but he wasn't prepared for how it would feel. His hands started shaking, and he had to grip the doorframe to steady himself. "I'm sorry," Jake said carefully. "I'm not sure what you mean." Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "I left my son here 2 months ago. Under the oak tree by your gate. I wrote a note saying his name was Tommy." She paused, wiping her eyes. "I've been watching from the road sometimes, and I've seen you taking care of him." "I need to explain." Jake's mind raced. His protective instincts kicked in, and he found himself wondering if he should call Mrs. Chun or the police. But something about Lisa's manner made him believe she was telling the truth. "Would you like to come in?" Jake asked finally. "We should probably talk." Lisa followed Jake into the house, and when she saw Tommy in his high chair, she broke down completely. The baby looked up at her with curious eyes, not recognizing the woman who had given birth to him. "Oh my God," Lisa whispered. "He's so much bigger. And healthy. I was so scared that he was going to die." Jake made coffee while Lisa composed herself, and then they sat at the kitchen table while Tommy played happily with his toys. Lisa's story came out slowly, interrupted by tears and long pauses. She was 22 years old and had been living with an abusive boyfriend when she became pregnant. When the relationship became violent, she fled to a women's shelter 3 states away. Tommy was born prematurely at a hospital where Lisa had no insurance and no support system. "I was so scared and alone," Lisa explained. "The social workers wanted to put Tommy in foster care because I couldn't prove I had a safe place to live. But I also couldn't go back to my boyfriend because he had threatened to hurt the baby." Lisa had discharged herself and Tommy from the hospital against medical advice. She spent 2 weeks living in her car, trying to take care of a newborn while figuring out what to do. Tommy wasn't gaining weight, and Lisa knew she was failing as a mother. "I drove around for days, looking for someplace safe to leave him," she continued. "I passed your ranch and saw how peaceful it looked. There were cattle and horses, and the house looked like a family should live there. I thought maybe whoever found him would be the kind of person who could give him a good life." Jake listened without judgment, but his heart was breaking. He looked at Tommy, who was babbling happily and reaching for his toys, and tried to imagine giving him up. "Lisa," Jake said gently, "I understand why you made the choice you did. But Tommy is thriving here, and we've started the adoption process. I love him like he's my own son." Lisa nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. "I can see that. And I'm grateful for everything you've done for him. But I'm his mother, and I want him back." The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult of Jake's life. Lisa explained that she had spent the past 2 months getting her life together. She had found a job at a restaurant in town, rented a small apartment, and was attending counseling at the women's shelter. She felt ready to be the mother Tommy deserved. "I made a mistake leaving him," Lisa said. "But I was scared and desperate. I thought I was doing what was best for him, but I realize now that I should have fought harder to keep us together." Jake struggled with conflicting emotions. He was angry that someone was trying to take away the child he had grown to love. But he was also sympathetic to a young mother who had been in an impossible situation. And, underneath it all, he knew that legally, Lisa probably had a stronger claim to Tommy than he did.
What happens now?
Jake asked. Lisa looked around the kitchen, taking in the high chair, the baby toys scattered on the floor, and the photos of Tommy that Jake had put up on the refrigerator.
I don't know, she admitted.
I spoke to a lawyer, and she said that because I'm Tommy's biological mother and I didn't formally give up my parental rights, I probably have a good case to get him back. But she also said that if you've been caring for him all this time, a court might consider what's in Tommy's best interests. Jake felt a spark of hope. Tommy had been with him for 2 months, and they had bonded completely. Surely that had to count for something.
Would you be willing to meet with Mrs. Chun?
Jake asked. She's our social worker. Maybe she can help us figure out what's best for Tommy. Lisa agreed, and Jake called Mrs. Chen immediately. She arrived at the ranch within an hour, bringing a colleague who specialized in family reunification cases. The meeting was emotional and complex. Mrs. Chen explained that the situation was unusual because Tommy had been abandoned without formal paperwork, but his biological mother was now seeking to reclaim him. The law generally favors reuniting children with their biological parents when it's safe to do so, Mrs. Chen's colleague explained. But the court will also consider the child's best interests and the bonds he's formed with his current caregiver. They spent several hours discussing possible solutions. Lisa could fight for immediate custody, which she would probably win.
Jake could fight the decision, which would mean months of legal battles and uncertainty for Tommy.
Or they could work together to find a solution that put Tommy's needs first. Lisa surprised everyone with her suggestion. What if we did this gradually, she said.
Tommy doesn't know me. Taking him away from Jake suddenly would be traumatic for him.
Maybe I could spend time here, getting to know him again, and we could transition slowly.
Jake wasn't sure how he felt about that idea. Having Lisa around would be a constant reminder that he might lose Tommy.
But it might also be better for Tommy than an abrupt change. I could get an apartment closer to the ranch, Lisa continued. I could visit every day and help take care of him. When he's comfortable with me, maybe he could spend nights at my place sometimes. We could figure out a custody arrangement that lets him have both of us in his life. Mrs. Chen thought it was a reasonable proposal. It's not a traditional solution, but it puts Tommy's emotional well-being first. We'd need to formalize everything through the court system, but it could work. Jake looked at Tommy, who was getting sleepy and starting to fuss. Without thinking, Jake picked him up and started the gentle rocking motion that always calmed the baby down.
Tommy immediately relaxed and laid his head on Jake's shoulder.
He trusts you completely, Lisa observed. I can see how much you love him. I don't want to take that away from him, but I also can't give up my son again. Over the next few weeks, they tried Lisa's plan. She found an apartment in town and started visiting the ranch every day. At first, Tommy was wary of her, crying when she tried to hold him and reaching for Jake when he was upset. But Lisa was patient and persistent. She learned Tommy's routines, helped with feedings and diaper changes, and gradually built a relationship with her son. Jake watched this process with mixed feelings, proud of Tommy's adaptability but fearful of losing his central role in the baby's life. The breakthrough came 3 weeks later. Jake had been working outside when he heard Tommy crying in the house. He rushed inside to find Lisa walking around the kitchen, bouncing Tommy gently and singing a soft lullaby. Tommy had stopped crying and was looking up at Lisa with the same trusting expression he usually reserved for Jake. He's starting to remember, Lisa said with tears in her eyes. I used to sing that song to him in the hospital. Jake felt his own eyes getting wet. He realized that this was what love really meant, wanting what was best for someone even when it was painful for yourself. The court proceedings took another month, but the judge approved an innovative shared custody arrangement. Tommy would live primarily with Jake on the ranch, where he was established and thriving. Lisa would have him for increasing amounts of time as he grew older and more comfortable with transitions. This is highly unusual, the judge said, but it's clear that this child is loved by both parties and that both have his best interests at heart. I'm approving this arrangement with the understanding that it will be reviewed regularly to ensure it continues to serve Tommy's needs."
6 months later, Jake stood on his front porch watching Lisa's car disappear down the driveway.
She was taking Tommy to her apartment for the weekend, something that had become routine. Jake still felt a pang every time they left, but he had learned to trust that Tommy would always come home. The ranch was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet than it had been after Sarah's death. This was the peaceful silence of a home where love lived, even when its occupants were temporarily away. Jake thought about the morning he had found a crying baby under the oak tree and how much his life had changed since then. He had gained a son, learned to open his heart again, and discovered that families could be formed in the most unexpected ways. When Lisa brought Tommy back on Sunday evening, the baby reached for Jake with obvious joy. At 18 months old, Tommy was walking and saying his first words. He called Jake Dada and Lisa Mama, accepting both relationships as natural parts of his world. As Jake tucked Tommy into his crib that night, he reflected on the journey they had all taken together. Lisa had grown into a confident mother, Jake had found purpose and joy again, and Tommy was thriving with the love of two devoted parents. The oak tree where Tommy had been found still stood by the front gate, but now it had a small memorial plaque that Sarah would have loved. It read, "Where love begins, miracles grow." Jake had put it there to honor the mysterious circumstances that had brought Tommy into his life and to celebrate the unconventional family they had all created together. The ranch was home to 3 people now, even when they weren't all there at the same time. And Jake knew that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together as a family built on love, sacrifice, and the belief that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. 3 days had passed since Jake found Tommy, and despite his best efforts, the baby wasn't getting better. Jake had managed to get some formula into him, but Tommy remained weak and listless. The long drive to Dr. Martinez's pediatric clinic in the county seat had confirmed Jake's worst fears. "Mr. Morrison," Dr. Martinez had said after examining Tommy, "this baby is severely malnourished and dehydrated. He needs immediate medical attention that I can provide here, but, long-term, he's going to need constant care from someone who understands infant nutrition and development." Jake sat in the clinic's waiting room, holding Tommy while the doctor made phone calls. He knew what was coming. Social services would get involved, and Tommy would be placed in foster care or put up for adoption. The thought of losing the baby made Jake's chest feel tight with an emotion he couldn't quite name. When the social worker arrived, Jake expected the worst. But Mrs. Chen surprised him with her gentle approach and genuine concern for both Tommy and Jake's situation. "I understand you've been caring for this baby since Tuesday," she said, settling into the chair across from Jake. "That takes a lot of courage, Mr. Morrison. Not everyone would have stepped up the way you did." Jake explained how he'd found Tommy and everything he'd tried to do to help him. Mrs. Chen took notes and asked questions, but she didn't seem in any hurry to take the baby away. "The thing is," she said finally, "our foster care system is overwhelmed right now. Finding a placement for a newborn who needs special medical attention isn't easy. If you're willing to continue caring for Tommy while we work through the legal process, that might be the best option for everyone." Jake's heart jumped. What would that mean exactly? Mrs. Chen explained that Jake could become a temporary foster parent while they searched for Tommy's birth parents and explored permanent placement options. It would require background checks, home visits, and parenting classes, but Tommy could stay at the ranch. "I have to be honest," she continued, "there's also the possibility that if no suitable family members come forward, you could eventually apply to adopt Tommy yourself. But that's a long process with no guarantees." Jake looked down at Tommy, who was sleeping peacefully in his arms. The baby's face had lost some of its earlier pallor, and he seemed more comfortable after the medical attention. "I want to try," Jake said quietly. "I don't know much about babies, but I'm willing to learn. This little guy needs someone, and maybe I need him too." The next few weeks transformed Jake's life completely. Mrs. Chen helped him set up a proper nursery in what used to be Sarah's craft room. Jake bought a changing table, a real crib, and more baby supplies than he'd ever imagined needing. Dr. Martinez prescribed a special high-calorie formula for Tommy and showed Jake how to monitor the baby's weight gain and development.
Tommy began eating better almost immediately, and his crying became stronger and more demanding. Jake threw himself into learning about infant care with the same determination he'd once applied to building the ranch. He read books, watched videos online, and called Dr. Martinez's office with questions at all hours. The nursing staff got to know him well and were always patient with his concerns. The hardest part was the sleepless nights. Tommy woke up every few hours needing to be fed, changed, or comforted. Jake would stumble through the house in his pajamas, warming bottles and checking temperatures. Sometimes he would fall asleep in the rocking chair with Tommy in his arms, only to wake up with a stiff neck and the baby crying for his next meal. But there were magical moments too. One morning, Jake was sure that Tommy smiled at him, even though Dr. Martinez said it was probably just gas. When Tommy first grabbed Jake's finger with his tiny hand, Jake felt his heart melt in a way he hadn't expected. Jake started talking to Tommy constantly, narrating everything he was doing around the ranch. "Now we're going to check on the cattle," he would say, carrying Tommy in his special baby carrier. "See that brown cow over there? Her name is Bessie, and she's going to have a calf in the spring." The other ranchers in the area began to notice changes in Jake. He seemed more focused, more purposeful. When word got around about the baby, some of his neighbors stopped by to offer help and advice. Martha Williams, who lived on the next ranch over, became an unexpected ally. She was in her 60s and had raised 4 children of her own. Martha started coming by twice a week to help with laundry and cooking, and she taught Jake important things about baby care that the books didn't cover. "You're doing fine, Jake," she would say when he worried about making mistakes. "Babies are tougher than they look, and love goes a long way toward making up for inexperience." Jake appreciated Martha's help, but he was also fiercely protective of his independence. He wanted to prove that he could take care of Tommy on his own. Sometimes this led to problems, like the day he ran out of formula and had to drive to town with a screaming baby, or the night Tommy spiked a fever and Jake spent hours on the phone with the emergency nurse hotline. But Tommy continued to grow stronger. By the end of the first month, he had gained 2 pounds and was sleeping for longer stretches at night. His eyes had turned from dark blue to a bright hazel, and his hair was coming in thick and brown. Jake found himself imagining Tommy's future on the ranch. He pictured teaching him to ride horses, showing him how to care for cattle, passing on all the skills that Jake had learned from his own father. The dreams felt dangerous because Jake knew that Tommy might not stay with him permanently, but he couldn't help hoping. The legal process moved slowly. Investigators tried to track down Tommy's birth parents using the limited information from the note, but they found no leads. No one had reported a missing baby, and no one came forward to claim him. Mrs. Chen continued her regular visits, documenting Tommy's progress and Jake's growing skill as a caregiver. She was impressed with how well Jake had adapted to fatherhood and how much Tommy was thriving under his care. "You've really surprised me, Mr. Morrison," she said during one visit. "When I first met you, I wasn't sure if you were ready for this kind of responsibility. But, looking at Tommy now, it's clear that you're exactly what he needed." Jake felt proud but also anxious. He knew that other families might be interested in adopting a healthy baby boy, and many of them would have more experience and resources than he could offer. One evening, as Jake was giving Tommy his bath in the kitchen sink, he noticed something that made his heart stop. Tommy was looking directly at him and making soft cooing sounds, as if he was trying to talk. When Jake spoke back to him, Tommy's face lit up with what was unmistakably a real smile. "Hey there, little man," Jake whispered, lifting Tommy out of the warm water and wrapping him in a soft towel. "Are you trying to tell me something?" Tommy made more happy sounds, and Jake felt tears start to form in his eyes. This tiny person trusted him completely, depended on him for everything, and seemed genuinely happy in his care. Jake realized that somewhere along the way, he had stopped thinking of himself as just a temporary caregiver. Tommy felt like his son. That night, Jake called Mrs. Chen to discuss the possibility of formally applying for adoption. She explained that the process would take several more months and would require extensive evaluation, but she encouraged Jake to move forward. "I think you and Tommy are good for each other," she said. "He's not the same baby who was left at your gate, and you're not the same man who found him.
Sometimes the best families are the ones that find each other in unexpected ways. As Jake tucked Tommy into his crib that night, he felt a sense of peace that he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. The ranch was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was the peaceful silence of a home where a loved child was sleeping safely. Jake stood in the doorway of the nursery, watching Tommy's chest rise and fall in the dim light from the hallway. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and more uncertainty about the future, but tonight, they were a family. Jake whispered a prayer of gratitude for the mysterious circumstances that had brought them together and asked for the strength to be the father that Tommy deserved. The sound of Tommy stirring reminded Jake that his own sleep would be interrupted again in a few hours, but he no longer minded. Taking care of Tommy had given Jake's life new meaning and purpose. The grief over Sarah's death would always be part of him, but it no longer defined his entire existence. Jake finally understood what Sarah had meant when she used to talk about the joy of raising children. It wasn't just about the happy moments, but about the daily commitment to loving someone more than yourself. Tommy had taught Jake that his heart was bigger than he had known, and that love could grow even in the midst of loss and uncertainty. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty ranch as Jake Morrison walked slowly toward the old wooden fence. His weathered hands gripped the coffee mug tightly, the steam rising in the cool mountain air. 3 months had passed since Sarah's funeral, and the silence around the ranch felt heavier with each passing day. Jake had built this life with his wife over 15 years. They had dreamed of raising cattle, growing old together, and maybe having children someday. But cancer took Sarah away at 38, leaving Jake alone with 200 acres of land and a broken heart that he wasn't sure would ever heal. The cattle needed feeding, the fences needed mending, and the bills kept coming. Jake tried to keep busy, throwing himself into ranch work from sunrise to sunset. The physical exhaustion helped him sleep at night, though he still reached for Sarah's hand in his dreams. On this particular Tuesday morning, something was different. As Jake walked toward the barn, he heard a sound that didn't belong on his quiet ranch. It was faint, almost lost in the morning wind, but unmistakable. A baby was crying. Jake stopped walking and listened carefully. The sound came again, weak and desperate. His heart began racing as he followed the noise toward the old oak tree near the front gate. There, in a cardboard box lined with a thin blanket, lay a tiny infant. The baby couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. Its face was red from crying, and its little body looked so fragile that Jake was afraid to touch it. A handwritten note was tucked beside the child, written in shaky handwriting that was hard to read. "I can't take care of him," the note said. "His name is Tommy. Please give him a chance at life. His mother loved him but couldn't keep him safe. I'm sorry." Jake's hands trembled as he picked up the baby. Tommy was so light, so small, that Jake worried he might hurt him just by holding him wrong. The infant's crying grew weaker, and Jake realized the child was probably hungry and cold. Inside the house, Jake tried to think clearly. He had no experience with babies. Sarah had always talked about having children, reading books about pregnancy and childcare. Jake wished desperately that she was there to tell him what to do. He wrapped Tommy in one of Sarah's soft sweaters and tried to warm some milk on the stove. The baby refused to drink from a regular cup, and Jake remembered seeing something about bottles on television. He didn't have any baby bottles, so he tried using a clean cloth to let Tommy suck the milk slowly. The process was messy and frightening. Tommy would drink a little, then start crying again. Jake worried that he was doing everything wrong. He had delivered calves and helped sick animals, but this tiny human being seemed so much more fragile and complicated. By afternoon, Jake realized he needed help. The nearest town was 20 miles away, and he didn't know any neighbors well enough to ask for advice. His parents lived in another state, and Sarah's family had never been close to him. Jake tried calling the local doctor's office, but they told him he needed to contact social services about an abandoned baby. The thought of giving Tommy to strangers made Jake feel sick. He looked at the sleeping child in his arms and felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah died. Purpose. That night, Jake barely slept. Every few hours, Tommy would wake up crying, and Jake would try again to feed him and keep him warm.
He moved Sarah's rocking chair from the bedroom to the living room and spent most of the night holding the baby, watching his tiny chest rise and fall. Jake thought about the note constantly. Someone had chosen his ranch, his gate, his oak tree. Maybe it was random, or maybe whoever left Tommy had watched the place and thought it looked safe. Either way, Jake felt responsible for this little life that had been left in his care. The next morning brought new challenges. Tommy seemed weaker, drinking even less milk and crying more softly. Jake's attempts at feeding weren't working well enough, and he started to panic. He needed real baby formula, proper bottles, and someone who knew about taking care of infants. Jake wrapped Tommy carefully and put him in the truck for the drive to town. The baby slept most of the way, which worried Jake even more than the crying had. At the general store, Jake bought everything he could think of: formula, bottles, diapers, baby clothes, and a small crib. The elderly woman at the checkout counter looked at Jake with curiosity but didn't ask questions. Jake was grateful for that. He wasn't ready to explain the situation to anyone yet. Back at the ranch, Jake struggled with mixing the formula to the right temperature and consistency. Tommy drank better from the bottle, but still not very much. Jake spent the afternoon calling veterinarians, thinking that maybe animal doctors would know something about feeding weak newborns. Dr. Peterson, who had helped with Jake's cattle for years, came out to the ranch that evening. He examined Tommy gently and explained that the baby needed more specialized care than Jake could provide alone. "This little one is dehydrated and underweight," Dr. Peterson said kindly. "I'm not a human doctor, but I've seen enough newborn animals to know when something's not right. You need to get him to a pediatrician tomorrow." Jake nodded, but his heart sank. He knew that taking Tommy to a doctor would probably mean involving social services and losing the baby to the system. Still, Tommy's health was more important than Jake's growing attachment. That night, as Jake held the sleeping baby and looked out at the stars Sarah used to love, he made a decision. He would do whatever it took to help Tommy get healthy and strong. If that meant giving him up to people who could care for him properly, Jake would find the strength to do it. But, deep in his heart, Jake hoped there might be another way. For the first time since Sarah's death, he felt like he had a reason to get up in the morning. Tommy needed him, and Jake needed Tommy more than he was ready to admit. The ranch felt different now. The silence was filled with Tommy's soft breathing and occasional cries. Jake found himself talking to the baby about the cattle, about Sarah, about the dreams they'd had for this place. Tommy couldn't understand the words, but he seemed to listen, his dark eyes following Jake's face when he was awake. Jake spent hours that night planning how he could learn to take better care of Tommy. He would read books, call doctors, do whatever it took to become the father this abandoned child needed. The thought scared him, but it also gave him hope for the first time in months. As dawn approached, Jake made coffee and stood by the window, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. Tommy slept peacefully in the makeshift bed Jake had created using pillows and blankets. For a moment, everything felt almost normal, like this was how life was supposed to be. But Jake knew that the real challenges were just beginning. Tommy needed proper medical care, legal documentation, and so many things that Jake didn't know how to provide. The weight of responsibility felt enormous, but Jake was determined not to let this innocent child down. He thought about the person who had left Tommy at his gate. Were they watching from somewhere, hoping that Jake would take good care of him? Did they know how much this baby would change Jake's life? Jake whispered a promise to the morning air that he would do everything in his power to give Tommy the loving home he deserved. The sound of Tommy stirring brought Jake back to the present moment. The baby was waking up, and it was time for another feeding attempt. Jake picked up the bottle and prepared himself for another day of learning how to be a father to a child who had already captured his heart completely.